do I take it away now?
Yeah, go for it.
Right. Hello everyone. Welcome back to episode 46 of the Tom, Stu and You podcast after a little hiatus of a few weeks. All that with the pandemic and with work, time just seems to be like blurring into one long month, year, whatever.
I saw
but yeah,
something
we're back.
the other day that said, just so you're aware, you're a third of the way through 2021 already.
Yeah,
And I was like,
exactly.
what? No.
Yeah,
Back up,
exactly.
back up.
Yeah, it's crazy. May already. But yeah, been super busy and hence the little break that we've had in bringing you the episodes. But lots to talk about. A lot's gone on in the past couple of weeks. And for 45 episodes now, I've been looking for an excuse, an angle with which to bring in the topic of football. And
I'm surprised it's made it this long, to be honest.
I know, right? I've done pretty well.
Good.
Yeah, like a year and a half or something like that. I've not really mentioned football once yet. But with the proposed plans for the European Super League a couple of weeks ago that eventually fell through, I thought it was a great opportunity to touch on football and also kind of expand on it a little bit and maybe how it shows what happened with the Super League shows, maybe wider considerations for society, for capitalism, obviously, because it's the Tom, Stu and You podcast, so we're going to get into
this
that.
is two of your favourite subjects. Capitalism
I know,
and football.
it's just collided together. But I think that maybe from what we've seen from, all the fan uprising and things like that, from all different, all different tribes, Liverpool fans, Man United fans coming together in, staunch opposition, in unity to this new Super League. It's good, and I think we'll come on to it obviously, but it made me a little bit hopeful in a wider context, not just a football in terms, but a wider context. So I guess I'll just start by saying, Stu, what is your relationship knowledge base with football? What's it like?
Oh, it's not, mate, to be honest. Football, I mean, we call it soccer in Australia to start with, so that's not a very good start, is it?
No.
The world sport, and we call it something completely different to everyone else but Americans.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up liking sport. I followed the Australian cricket team, and I used to know all the players and everything as a kid. Even now, I still watch the highlights of some of the local teams, not local as in like the state teams and stuff that I followed when I was back in Oz. Watch the highlights when the Australian cricket test team, plays and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Like to cheer on the Australians in any FIFA World Cup. Not that we ever really do very well, but Timmy Cahill does all right sometimes.
Yeah, he does all right. He scores some great goals.
He does. So that gives you a little bit of hope until you realise that we're in, Group D or something, and just no chance. So a lot of this news to me was a bit surprising. Maybe I knew the culture around football, around soccer is intense. It's deeply ingrained in society, especially in those places where football has taken off, especially in the UK, especially in Africa and South America, and Latin America. So I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on this topic, especially coming from an outside perspective and trying to understand what it is that has happened. So maybe let's start there.
Yeah.
Give us a summary, like what are we talking about? Like what has happened in the last few weeks? You haven't been paying attention to British news that is very football focused.
So yeah, British news, but I think it has had ripples worldwide because obviously the popularity of football. I would say that it is like the top sport in the world. Obviously, I might be a bit biased, but I think that it is. But anyway, basically what happened is that 12 clubs, so the top six in inverted commas, I must add, from England, which is Liverpool, Man United, Man City, Tottenham. Like I don't know what that's about. I can't remember the last time they won anything. Arsenal, who've been playing terribly and haven't, who've been awful, and Chelsea. Anyway, and then the three from Spain, which is Madrid, Barcelona, and Atletico Madrid, and three from Italy, Juventus, Inter Milan, and AC Milan. all came together and organised to make the Super League, a league that would consist of 20 teams, which would be 15 founding members. So they also approached Bayern Munich and Dortmund from Germany, who rejected the proposals, and PSG, who also rejected it, but I believe they rejected it because of an advertising sort of conflict of interest that they have with beIN Sports. But yeah, anyway, they came together to form the Super League, which they did. They announced it a couple of weekends ago. And it's a league from which those founding members could never be relegated. So there was a lack of competition there from the start, and who would receive really excessive windfalls from broadcasting, just from being founders of the league. They were due to share £3 billion, I think it was, because the whole thing's been funded by JP Morgan. Alarm bells should probably be ringing for people. So yeah, it was a situation where basically they were, because of the pandemic and the effect that that's had on people being able to go to the games and things like that. I think that these clubs were trying to secure their financial position for the future by creating a league from which they could never be relegated from, which is against the whole point of sport, the whole competitive edge of sport. And I think that's probably the main problem that people had with it. But it can also be seen, because of the huge debts that some of these clubs have, like Man United and Tottenham, it can also be seen as they were trying to create a sort of cartel, a kind of an oligarchy, a monopoly on football. And it essentially would enable them to kind of bail themselves out or keep themselves going, because of the sums of money that have been bandied about. It's in the billions with this Super League. And so there'd be those 15 clubs in a league from which they couldn't be relegated. There'd be 5 other clubs who would qualify through some mechanism that wasn't thought out. So no one knew how clubs would get into the Super League to be able to compete against these teams. So that's clubs like Ajax, who are a hugely successful European club, Porto, Stoke Bucharest, Sparta Prague, all these kinds of teams who do really well in their own domestic leagues, and earn the right to go into the Champions League, which is the tournament that we currently have, which is managed by UEFA. And so a lot of people thought that this European Super League was kind of like a bargaining tool, to shift the power away from UEFA into the hands of these big clubs. And yeah, it's been met with a huge amount of backlash from the fans, and rightly so. I think that obviously the lack of a competitive edge, because if you're just in a league where Liverpool are going to play Real Madrid every year, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to, get into those top places in the domestic league to be able to enter into the elite competitions. You're just there as a matter of you are Liverpool Football Club. It goes against the whole ethos of what sport is about. Because I should add that, to get into the Champions League, for example, you have to do well in the domestic league in the previous year. So you have to finish in the top 4. If you're in the top 4, you go into in the UK anyway. You go into the Champions League, and that's how you get there. Basically, it's based on merit, and going toe to toe with people throughout the season in order to get and earn that position to be able to play against the best teams in the world in a European competition the next season. And so people just thought that this went completely against that ethos. It was also clearly a way for billionaire owners to enrich themselves and ensure profits and money and revenue would keep coming in from broadcasting rights, which is predominantly where they get their money from these days. It's not from actual fans attending the games and things like that. It's from selling broadcasting rights to Sky, to BT Sport, to DAZN, wherever you watch these things. But at the same time, there was an interview with John Barnes, who's an old Liverpool legend football player, who said that this isn't the fans winning, really. It was a competition between 2 sets of elites to exploit the fans, really, because it should be borne in mind that the Premier League itself was a breakaway league in the early 1990s, when Sky came on the scene and, you know, offered huge amounts of money to get the rights to broadcast these games. And then that's when the proliferation of money really became a thing in football. You know, players started getting paid like insane wages. Like, I think, you know, I think the highest paid player in the Premier League is on like £500,000 a week or something like that, which is pretty mental. But you also have parasitic elements like agents who demand agent fees of like 20 million for a transfer. That's just to the agent. So there's so much money banded about in football that I think it would be just, and it seems to be, you know, the top teams amass the greatest amount of wealth, the greatest amount of resources, are able to buy the best players, are able to solidify their places at the top of their respective leagues. So if you like look at the German league, for example, Bayern Munich have won it for like the past 8 seasons in a row. Before, I think Inter Milan have won the Italian league this season, but before that, I think Juventus had won it for so many seasons in a row. The Premier League is majority of the time always, you know, Man City, and you know, it used to be Man United year on year. We have had, you know, due to the competitive element, which is great, we have had, you know, success stories such as Leicester, but and Liverpool, I must add, because we haven't won the title for 30 years. Hence why the shirt's there behind me. But yeah, so with the Super League, you could never have had a Leicester City winning the title or anything like that, because of the amount of money that these teams in the Super League would have been able to amass. You wouldn't be able to compete with them, basically. And so that's why there's been uproar. And I think that, you know, that is basically what's been happening with football.
Well, and that's the Tom Show, everyone. Interview over. I don't think there was anything basic about that explanation. So if you're like me and listening to this episode and you're just like, what? But I've got a few follow-up questions for Thomas because I'm still very confused about the whole thing. What I can say though is very clear is that this is something that you're obviously very passionate about. So like the fact that you just spoke for 10 minutes, literally summarizing the entire situation for us, and somehow we're able to link in not only past players but also every single club that is involved and not even involved, and also previous like surprise winners of tournaments, and you just mentioned 3 different tournaments that I didn't even know was a thing, and relegating, being in the spirit of the game.
Yep.
We're going to break all of that down so that we're absolutely clear about what all of this means.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that's a different way of sport than I think.
Yeah. So what I would say is that it's important to know the history of these clubs, especially in Europe, especially, you know, with the Premier League, the clubs that are in the Premier League. So the ones in the Premier League, like the one that I support, you know, Manchester United, a lot of the original clubs that were set up over 100 years ago come from working class industry. They come from, a lot of them came from the Northwest, which is where Liverpool are from in the UK. They're tied really closely to industry, like, you know, textile mills, ammunitions factories, all that kind of industrial, you know, revolution manufacturing kind of thing. So they're really, really heavily rooted in working class. You know, they were essentially working class assets. They were created by the working class. They were important community assets. They're a place for people to come together every week. So it's got that social collective element to it. And if you look back at the history of football, originally they're not paid very well. You do it out of the love of the game. Even these days, if I got offered to play for Liverpool, it'd be a dream, and I'd do it for just being able to live. Just the amount. I wouldn't have to be paid like hundreds of thousands a week or anything like that. That's how it should be, maybe, but that's maybe a dream. But then as it goes on, and I would guess that it's around the time of, you know, Thatcher and Reagan, as so much of this stuff is, all the ramifications of, you know, that neoliberal kind of attitude towards these things. There was a picture, a meme that I saw the other day, that said football's, you know, created by the poor and stolen by the rich, and that's absolutely true when you look at the history of the clubs in England. And so there's a time, especially around the 80s, 90s, especially when the Premier League comes in, that big money invades and starts taking over. And since that time, the money in football has just gone up so exponentially. It's so crazy when you compare it with other aspects of society. Then you get things like billionaire owners coming in to invest into the club. So you've got money from, you know, the Middle East, oil money from the Middle East, United Arab Emirates and Qatar and things like that. Obviously, the American owners have come in as well. Liverpool have American owners, United have American owners, so do Arsenal. And also, you know, Russian oligarch type owners like Roman Abramovich and things like that. And this Super League is just another way for billionaires to enrich themselves, really, because there's been backlash before, especially with Liverpool, about the raising of ticket prices, which is something they tried to do. Ticket prices are ridiculous. And I often think that the football stadiums are becoming more corporatized. So they're more built for like corporate out days rather than, you know, working class people who, you know, pay to come and support the team that they've loved for, you know, since they were born. Because you're born into it, really. Like, I didn't have a choice to support Liverpool. You know, all my family support Liverpool, basically. And, you know, that's where we're from. And that's why I support them.
Let's talk more about that, actually. Because let's talk more about that, because that provides a context, I think, that is needed for someone to truly understand why this is a big deal. Because, like, as I said, like, I grew up in a sporty family. Like, we followed sports, but following the Australian cricket team is not like following Liverpool. Like, the closest we get in Australia maybe is to like some of our rugby league or rugby union teams or AFL teams, for example, where we have like diehard fans. Like, AFL was probably closer even than rugby to what like football means to someone in England. I mean, and we're just talking about England here right now, but in terms of the love of the sport, it's exactly the same in Latin America, it's the same in Europe, it's the same in Africa. Talk to me a little bit about like being a kid. Like, what can you describe like those first few years, like where you were indoctrinated into Liverpool being a part of your,
that's a good word.
A part of your identity? Like, talk to me about like the feelings you get being in those stadiums. Like, what is it like being a child and like seeing this community of people accept you so readily, and like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it means a lot, actually. I must admit that I haven't been to a game for a very long time, mostly because of like geographical location, also because of the fact that ticket prices are quite high. To get a season ticket, you have to go onto like this waiting list, like 100-year waiting list or something like that. So it's pretty hard to get one. But I have been to Anfield quite a few times. The first game that I ever went to, my dad took me to Liverpool against Leeds United at Elland Road, because we lived in Leeds at the time. And I think we might have had to, you know, be quite quiet when Liverpool scored, because I think we were sitting in a Leeds end. But it was just a way to go and see the game. And I just remember that, you know, getting the shirt every year was something that I had to get, or that I wanted for my birthday. And again, that's another way of making money. That you know, they always change the shirt every year, and I was shocked to find that even, you know, some of the shirts are now £100 a shirt. So it's just like, how is that affordable for, you know, what is essentially, you know, majoritatively a working class fan base for a team like Liverpool? But yeah, so the shirts was something that I had to get. even just stories from like my granddad, who was a Liverpool fan, who used to tell me that he used to jump on the back of wagons to go to away days just to get there. And that's like kind of that kind of illustrates how important it is to get there. And I think, like, I am obviously biased when I say that, but Liverpool is a kind of like it feels more like a family kind of club. Like, if you live in Liverpool, and I will say this because all my family are from there, but the people there are really friendly, they're really funny. You know, it's a lot about community going to the game. And to be in the cop end when, you know, they're singing, you know, "You'll Never Walk Alone," and you're passing the flag over your head and stuff like that. I've never known an atmosphere like it, like, ever. And these are the things that are important in football. That would be there, you know, if there wasn't all the huge money and stuff like that, because it's so important to, you know, and it all comes from working people come together to try and, you know, create something to, or we working towards something together. In fact, I got quotes from Shankly that I was going to use later. But like, so Bill Shankly is one of the most famous managers. In fact, the most famous manager for Liverpool. They weren't doing that well until he came in, and he changed the team. They become like unbeatable. Anfield became like a fortress, is what they call it, and that's kind of what we've been having again with Jurgen Klopp. But he said, these are his words, and this is the kind of foundation that Liverpool's built upon. He says, "Team spirit is a form of socialism. In my own politics, I don't go in for politics, but that kind of camaraderie is a basis for socialism. When you hear people running down fellas that are socialists, I think they're wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm talking life. I'm not talking about politics in the true sense of politics. I'm talking about humanity, people dealing with people and people helping people." And this is the Liverpool manager, and this is the kind of ethos that is instilled into the club. He also said, the socialism I believe in is everybody working for the same goal and everybody having a share in the rewards. That's how I see football. That's how I see life. And, you know, that's from... So I shared something and tagged Liverpool on Instagram saying, what would Shankly think of this idea where he's trying to basically take the game further away from the people who depend on it, really. Who you know, who love to go to the games, who give everything to go to the games, who will, you know, pay all the money that they save to go to a game and to follow the team. So if they're talking about having a Super League where you're playing like, you know, Real Madrid one week and, you know, Juventus the next week, that's a lot of travel to Europe as well. You know, you don't think about the expense of actually... They're kind of like preying upon people's tight, intimate and emotional ties to the club to make them not fans but consumers, really, and to extort more money out of them. But yeah, being in the cop end is amazing. I didn't often get to go as a kid. My dad is someone who likes to watch football on TV because he's in the warmth. You know, he's got a beer. He gets the instant replay. There's not people shouting, "Who are you?" at him and stuff like that, which he never understood. Like, "I'm Phil Westhead, who are you?" kind of thing. But yeah, but it's just great, and and I suppose it is almost like a religion in a way.
Oh, it is definitely a religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it most certainly is.
Yeah, because even there's things that I don't like about football. Like, I really don't like the amount of money that, you know, some of the players get paid. But more than that, I hate the amount of money that the owners are making. Because if you think about it, the players are really just employees. And so maybe that's the one job in the world where they are actually getting the value, you know? They're actually getting what they are worth, kind of thing. But yeah, it's something that I didn't have a choice in. And like big games, like when we came back from 3-0 down against AC Milan in the Champions League final in 2005, and we won that game, that is the spirit of competition. And like it's like against all odds kind of stuff. And it was unbelievable. Like, me and my brother like ran out the door, ran down the street, like... just like, it was so great. You saw when I was in Canada, we won the Champions League. I and we all went around, you know, the football team's house and stuff like that, and that was great as well. And even the year before that, when we were in the Champions League final, and I was in Edmonton, I went to a bar with my mate that I was staying with there, and there were so many people there, and so it does have that international element, no doubt about it. But I don't think that you can say that you know, the people who support Liverpool from afar have, you know, more of a connection than the people who go week in, week out, whose, you know, family for generations have supported the club, who've, you know, gone every week, who basically bleed Liverpool kind of thing. And the same for all the other clubs that were involved in this as well. And that's why this Super League thing has struck such a chord, is because I think it was an attempt to further make fans customers rather than fans, and just to take it away from them even further than it has been, which was obviously met with some considerable force, which gives me hope. But yeah, you're totally right to bring that up, to kind of provide context to it, because it is so emotional, I guess. Like the emotional attachment that people have to it is massive.
Like people like me just see it as a game. There's basically nothing in my. So I knew you living in Canada, you would be up at night at 2-3 a.m. in the morning to watch a game live, and then still come to work at 8 a.m. the next morning.
Yeah. That's stupid, isn't it?
Like, it is. Logically, the love that you feel for this sport doesn't make sense. Because, like, I love watching it, I love playing the sport, but it's not a fast, fun game to watch a lot of the time. Like most games are, you know, 2 or 3 goals.
For sure.
But you would get up in the middle of the night from across the other side of the globe to watch your team, your identity, play live, as opposed to just watching the highlights the next morning in 3 minutes while you're having your breakfast and your coffee. You need to establish that sort of emotion and that sort of sense of self-identity in the club. And I like the fact that you said you had no choice but to be a Liverpool supporter. Like that is the context you need to understand why taking these teams and pulling them into a separate Super League is so important. And this is where it ties into that working class background as well. I know you can say it and it doesn't really make sense, like, at first, but when you realize that, like, this was the working class people's game, like, this was established in the time when there was such a difference between the aristocracy and the working class, that this was, like, their thing. This was how that, you know, this was as close as they would get to an equal level playing field with people that are in different classes to them. It's something that they created. And so because of that, I like that meme about, you know, built by the poor and stolen by the rich. This whole Super League, to me, I've been trying to come up with an analogy that kind of makes sense as to, like, what this all means, because you start talking about the 3 different leagues and, you know, the different countries involved and all these different teams. It's very easy to get confused and just be like, oh well, the British are just overreacting again. Like, that sounds like them.
About football, probably.
About football, yeah. And I try to think, it's like an analogy of, like, if a group of people at high school declare themselves the cool kids, not for any reasonable explanation. There's no reason why they are better than anyone else. They just happen to have rich parents. They just declare themselves a cool group, and no one else is invited to play unless they say they're allowed to come play. Their kids automatically get put into the cool group when they become of age, and everyone else is just left alone. So there's, like, what is the point of anyone trying to, you know, to do good at school when only the cool group get all the awards, only the cool group get all the money, they get all the positions of power at high school. You know, they run the school, and all of a sudden some American exchange student comes in and joins the cool group just because they have a lot of money too.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. So, like, with the Super League, it was like the biggest clubs, and then they were like Tottenham, and it was like, and I'm not sure what they've won in like the past however many years or whatever, but their owner is a billionaire. So maybe you have to be a billionaire to be able to be in this club, kind of thing. You have to be a billionaire or like a really good team like Bayern Munich or something like that. And that was your admission fee.
But imagine that cool group then walking around and stealing everyone's lunch money too. So that only they could buy the good food at the tuck shop, while everyone else had to just like deal with the scraps as well.
Exactly, yeah. That's a great analogy. But it's like this Super League was to the detriment of everyone else as well, because obviously the teams involved do have a huge following and they have huge intellectual property and all this sort of stuff, and that can't be denied in the world that we live in. But it's to the detriment of other teams. It's to the detriment of other competitions, like the FA Cup. The FA Cup, when I was growing up, was a huge thing. Like it is a huge thing to be a part of. It's a competition where basically all the leagues in the UK sort of compete against each other. So Liverpool will play like lower league teams, and you get some huge upsets. And this is what football's all about. And it's not about Liverpool playing Real Madrid every week, where there's no relegation and no threat. Nothing to be lost if you don't perform well, because you'll just be in the same league next year. Whereas like the FA Cup is like, minnows taking on giants, and that's what people want to see. Like Liverpool playing Everton. I'm not saying Everton are minnows at all. They're not. They're in the Premier League doing well, but Liverpool, because it's a derby, it means a hell of a lot more to people in Liverpool than playing Barcelona every weekend. But I get that people outside who, say like in America, who think Liverpool against Barcelona every week, that sounds amazing. Do you know what I mean? It sounds good from the outside. Yeah. People want to see these huge, everything's about like the biggest, in boxing, the biggest fights nowadays, the biggest whatever, blah, blah, blah. So this was just that. Yeah, it's the biggest.
A YouTube star can sell out.
Don't get me started on that.
Fight.
Don't get me started on that, because, that is not boxing. And boxing
it's got nothing to do with the actual skill, does it? It all comes
boxing,
back money.
And boxing as a sport should not bow to that kind of pressure, but it does, because it's economic pressure.
It's
ridiculous.
Like, literally, it's an analogy to this football situation where they're wanting short-term economic gains at the detriment of basically their entire supporter base. Like, what's it matter? Because there's enough people who don't have the same love and history and background and self-identity involved in these teams, that there's enough. Like, the whole point of the Super League was that they would get all of these new audiences involved, so like the American audience and stuff involved, which is just crazy. It's just crazy to give up your loyal supporters in the hope that you gain enough short-term followers.
But that seems to be the position in football as well, and you get it with the owners, with not understanding the heritage of the clubs and the history of the clubs and the relationship that the fans have had with the club. Like, I think that the new owner of Liverpool, the Henry guy, he has had to apologise numerous times. 3 times I can remember fully. One, obviously, for the Super League, and to be fair, he was one of the first of the billionaire owners to come out and apologise for it. Also for putting club staff on furlough last year. So he got some backlash for that as well. And also for trying to raise the ticket prices. And that's across the board. Like Arsenal did it as well.
Yeah.
Arsenal's billionaire owner furloughed people, furloughed the Gunnosaurus, the team mascot, and one of the players, Mesut Ozil, had to step in and pay his wages so they would keep the mascot. Crazy stuff like that. And footballers do earn a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but billionaires were doing this. Not millionaire football players. So yeah, it's just pretty crazy stuff.
But they're running it like a business with no loyalty to their staff.
That's what it is. Yeah, it's, and as I was saying before, don't get me wrong. I know that there are like avid Liverpool fans in Canada, in America, everywhere. So I've been to some of those supporters clubs in Canada. When you first get there and you're trying to meet people, and you're like, oh, football's a good way to meet people, kind of thing. So yeah. And I know that they're avid fans, and they're often fans who've come from Liverpool and moved over, kind of thing. But the links that the people around City, around the, whose family have gone back generations supporting the club, whose granddad also jumped on the back of wagons to go and see them away and stuff like that. It's just so much deeper. And what this did was take it further away from the working class people of Liverpool. So it was like, it did try and take what is essentially an internationally recognised brand and float it. It's sort of like this floating capitalism across the globe, where it was more about broadcasting, getting people in America to buy into it. And, what way do you do that? Because people in, America, in, India, China, wherever people are going to be watching this, are they going to be bothered about, I don't know, Liverpool against Kidderminster Harriers, or I could have named any team then, but I don't know why they just came to mind. Liverpool against, these lower league clubs, or Liverpool against Barcelona, Liverpool against Real Madrid. And that's how they've tried to sell it, I guess. And that's why it's been met with such backlash, especially that added to the lack of competition. It's just all been about greed, making more money, almost becoming like an oligarchy, a monopoly, a cartel of huge football teams who would earn, a lot of money every year for being in a league that they just had right to be in. And yeah, it was basically creating a monopoly, and it would have affected the lower leagues, as I've said. Grassroots football, it would have affected. Grassroots football has huge problems because there's this whole idea, and this is essentially what the Super League was saying as well. I think Perez, the Madrid president, came out and said, what we need to do is amass all the money at the top, with these huge clubs, and it will, as we've heard before, trickle down economics sort of thing. Oh, yeah. Trickle down economics in football is what we were going for, and that's been rejected. And so why should we accept that in other forms of life? To look at this as a kind of, I see this as a good example, as a good opportunity, as maybe a teachable moment to look through the lens of football and see it as a microcosm of society in a way. To see that there's people who are trying to commodify what we love and appreciate or value in so many different areas of life, be that health or housing or anything like that, things that people should have a right to, things that are tax dollars, pounds, whatever, should go towards providing. In the spirit of Shankly, then the quotes that I read out earlier, like everyone's succeeding. It's actually amazing when you do look back at past really successful managers, how many of them, do have these kind of socialist tendencies in the way that they view the world, and in the way that they view, the importance of the team. Obviously you have individual brilliant players, Messi, Ronaldo, people like that, who are amazing players. But if you try playing Messi as an individual against 11 players, he will get destroyed, I'm pretty sure. So it's all about the collective. Alex Ferguson was very critical of the Tories and Thatcher and stuff like that, the austerity that we've seen, that we still see with the Conservatives these days. Austerity, the cutting of services, important services for people, have disproportionately affected people in the north in the UK. And isn't it interesting that the clubs that have folded in the UK are the ones from the north? Bury FC and things like that. Bolton were really close to going into administration, all from the northwest, all from like quite poor working class areas. And so isn't that funny how what's happening with football is kind of reflected in society as well? If you think about it in terms of monopolies and things like that, so these teams would have a monopoly on the Super League, on the money and things like that. That's what we have with Google and Facebook and Amazon and all these types of things. So why aren't we pissed off about that kind of stuff? Look at what it's funny because Boris Johnson came out in opposition to the Super League. I thought that's actually hilarious because his party stands for neoliberal capitalism. So that he should be all for this. It's super weird. So why is he doing it?
Popularity.
Probably for popularity, yeah.
Yep.
With the working class, because they'll go, Boris saved football, or Boris was against the people who were going to take football. but they're doing exactly, what's he doing with giving out, contracts to donors and mates and things like that.
Yeah.
Why aren't people pissed off about that? And that's why it gave me hope to see, fans from all clubs come together to object to what was going on, and to see the power of the fans in unity. Because, as Yuval Harari says, there's things to be taken from things like nationalism, from a sort of tribalism, in that, Liverpool fans are all wanting the same thing, kind of thing. We're all together in this experience, in this desire to see Liverpool win and that kind of thing. And that's the same for every club. But with this, it was basically unanimous, and everyone put aside, their colours and things like that, and people from all different backgrounds came together to object to this greed, and basically a move that would probably have killed the game as we know it in terms of the competition. And if that kind of thinking, that kind of drive can be applied to things like the NHS, like housing, things like that, then that makes me really quite hopeful.
Yeah, a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of work needs to be done in connecting those stories, I think. But it does show a good example of how people can come together and put aside tribal differences for the good of other people, for the spirit of the game. Because as you say, international audiences aren't going to care about who Liverpool is playing. They want to see Liverpool play Barcelona. They don't want to see Liverpool play literally any other team that I've never heard of before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But for those little teams, it's a huge deal. It's a massive deal to be able to play Liverpool or Manchester United.
Their community and everything.
Yeah.
The last thing we want to see, and this is basically what the Super League was hoping to do, is turn every single game into the Super Bowl, where
pretty much,
the supporters don't give a about the actual game. No one really cares who wins or loses. They want to get drunk and celebrate and see some famous.
Watch the half-time show.
Half-time. It all becomes about pizzazz as opposed to the actual skill and love of the game. And I think that was what was at risk of being lost with the Super League.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
There's a time for pizzazz. The 2020 league in Australia is trying to attract new audiences, and so they have fireworks go off when a Sixers hit, and they have half-time show and everything. But a lot of people still come to it. You're still there to watch the game.
Yeah, for sure.
Whereas, as you're seeing in boxing with, this whole Jake Paul thing, the YouTuber guy,
it's ridiculous.
Pretty much every sport around the world, but it was probably most clear in boxing and in the Super League in the UK and Europe. There are things that people still do care about, where money cannot be the most important thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think you're connecting that to life is the next.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're also right to bring in kind of in terms of the Super League, the Americanisation of it, because that is an aspect, certainly. And it is interesting that, some of the owners involved here are from America. And some of them, like John Henry, who owns Liverpool, owns the Red Sox. But again, going back to that difference in the history of these teams, it's more of a franchise model in America, where you can just set up a team and move it, and that's happened in basketball, it's happened in football. I was telling you just before we came on about the LA Lakers. The LA Lakers aren't an LA team originally; they're from Minneapolis. So if you try to pull up Liverpool and move it somewhere else, it just would not work in that way, which is what they're essentially trying to do with this system, is to make it more international, to make it more Super Bowl. They have the Super Bowl now at Tottenham Stadium. So there is that sort of merger of, the Americanisation of sports creeping in, sort of thing. And let's not, in the UK, let that happen with healthcare and things like that, as another little parallel. Because there are firms, American firms getting access to contracts for data in the NHS and stuff like that. And why are they interested in that kind of stuff? So yeah, that is something that needs to be we need to be wary of for sure. The creeping insidious privatisation of NHS services and things like that. You see that with track and trace and all this kind of stuff, which isn't. It's got an NHS logo on it, but it's actually like a private firm that takes care of it. This is like creeping privatisation, which is something that everyone in the UK should be staunchly against, because we all contribute our taxes, which pays towards the NHS. We've all had loved ones, friends, whatever, who've benefited from free healthcare. We have friends, family who work in the NHS who are who don't get valued the way that they should, and we should be up in arms about it the same way we up in arms about our football. We've taken all the bailing out of bankers and stuff like that since 2008, cuts to services, austerity under a Tory government, yet somehow they're still more popular than the political alternative in this country. The Conservatives have presided over 150,000 COVID deaths in this country, yet they're untouchable in the polls. It's quite crazy when you think about it. But again, that's probably because of the weakness of the opposition. But why aren't we more pissed off about that kind of stuff? And if we could mobilise around these things the way that we mobilise around football, then I think we're onto a winner, because the amount of civil disobedience that we've seen during a pandemic, it's been quite organised, has bore fruit in the fact that the fans got this stopped. And so if we can have a similar solidarity, a similar sense of community for each other about the NHS and things that belong to us, like the NHS belongs to the people, we should want everyone to have affordable housing, and not just be renters for our whole life, especially working class people of just this generation are likely to just be renters for most of their life, and we don't own anything. And then that takes us into ownership of football clubs, because fans should have some sort of ownership in their football teams, and it can work. Like Motherwell's a team in Scotland which is fan owned, which is doing pretty well. It's like mid division in the Scottish Premier League. We have like democratizing features such as they have like fans unions kind of things. Like there's one for Liverpool called the Spirit of Shankly, who put pressure on the board, people who decide ticket prices, things like that, so they're the voice of the fans essentially. So they are a democratizing feature. There's people doing similar things in Newcastle who want to try and buy a share, have a seat at the table, and maybe that is the answer. Maybe fans, like we talk about democratization of the workplace, this is just another sphere of life to democratize, I think. To have fan representation, at least fan representation on the board, I think is hugely important, because that would then go about connecting the club back to the fans, rather than it just being owned by a billionaire from America who just sees it as a cash cow sort of thing. So that's something that we should do, and maybe that's why the German teams weren't involved that much, because they have a system in the Bundesliga of 50+1, which means that at least 51%, I think, of the ownership has to be club owned. So for the fans, basically, you can only have a maximum of 49% corporate interest representation with the club. It's not a perfect scheme, clearly, because Bayern Munich are dominant in that league, completely dominant. They basically win every year. Dortmund come second, and they have run close races. I think Dortmund have pushed them to the line on a number of occasions. But again, there's fan ownership there, and it's hugely important. Like the CEO of Dortmund in 2016 said, the German spectator traditionally has close ties with the club, and if he gets the feeling that he's no longer regarded as a fan but instead as a customer, we'll have a problem. And that was obviously the case. Like too many people, too many fans in the UK feel like they're customers now, like they're just consumers of football, really. And that's been a creeping problem for a long time, I guess, ever since Sky came in, as I said before, in 1992 and created the Premier League, which was a breakaway league from the English Football League. And then a lot of the football became pay-per-view, so you had to pay to watch it on the telly and things like that. And I don't know if you've ever looked at Sky packages, but they are quite expensive, and so people end up spending a load of money on it because obviously the love of the club is too strong, and people profit from these things and take advantage of them in a way. So fan ownership, all for that, if that can be the case, and it's happened all over the place. Like Bury, who I said before, went into administration and are no longer in the Football League. Fans have created their own team, Bury at AFC, and are trying to create, rise something from the ashes of that club, basically, because it meant so much to them. Like, who are the supporters of Bury supposed to go and support? Man United or some other close team or something like that? No, like, Bury's their club, and it's great to see that they're trying to create something. The same happened with Wimbledon. A franchisey kind of thing happened with that. Wimbledon got picked up and put in Milton Keynes and got renamed MK Dons, and the fans of Wimbledon have created their own team, AFC Wimbledon, who are now in the same league as MK Dons. It's a great story. Like, they created it, and now they're competing with the team that got taken away from them. So you know what I'm like on this podcast. I'm all for democratizing things, and so why should football be any different? Whether it's a 50+1 model like they have in Germany, which isn't perfect, and there are loopholes around it. Like if a corporate interest has had a relationship with a club for more than 20 years, I think that rule can go out the window for that. So I think that's the case for Wolfsburg or something like that, who have a relationship with Volkswagen. But yeah, so that kind of thing, or definitely fan representation on the board, and failing that, mass civil disobedience clearly works.
Yeah. So basically, to summarise, we should all be more pissed off. Everyone should start watching more football and get more involved just in life. Start demanding representation in everything.
It's shown that people with money operate in their own interests. That doesn't only apply to football. It applies to other aspects of life. Definitely applies to other aspects of life. We've seen that. So we can't be passive. We can't just be passive and let these things happen. And when we're not passive and come together in solidarity and for things that we love, value, think that we have a right to, etc., all those types of things, we can achieve great things. We can stop things from happening. We can stop people from exploiting, our love of something, our belief in something. And so, my hope is that football has served as sort of a microcosm of society, and that should be studied, and people should go, oh yeah, but isn't this like the same as, what the Tories do with the NHS and stuff like that? And like, yes, so let's get together and basically stick it to them.
Exactly. Never walk alone.
Never walk alone.
That's a good one to end on.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to wrap it up there, folks. This has been a long hour of a very football-focused chat from Tom. It's obviously very clear how passionate he is about everything. Wes, number 30, as you can see behind him there on the wall, just been looking for an opportunity.
That's because, I've been looking for an opportunity to put that up, and today represented the perfect time. And it's 30 because I was 30, and it had taken 30 years for us to win the league, so that's what it's all about, It's taken my whole lifetime when I was 30 for us to win the league. All the trials and tribulations and tears and, little successes, the FA Cup, the Champions League, the other Champions League, the league.
And he's still a diehard supporter. It makes no logical sense. But that's football for you, folks. Humans are emotional beings. You cannot get away from the facts, so... They are, indeed. Well, everyone, this has been fantastic. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and we appreciate you being patient with our little hiatus. Honestly, this won't be a weekly podcast anymore, but we'll make every episode as often as we possibly can. looking
We got a
forward
lot of
to-
jobs spinning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I guess the guests coming up as well, though. So stay tuned for some
Yeah,
some wonderful interview
Awesome.
conversations.
yeah. And if you have any views on the Super League, anything you think
Yeah.
that we've got wrong, anything you think we've got right, get in touch. I know there's a lot of avid football supporters out there, so let us know what you think at all the usual places.
Yeah, if you prefer pizzazz to actually just like watching sport, let us know. Yeah, I do love a good highlight reel, and fireworks are cool, even if they're not super highlights. But yeah, send us an email, hi@topstewardyou.com. You can find us on social media at topstewardyou, and we'll be back chatting with you and hopefully with another amazing guest very, very shortly.
Yeah, until next time, thank you everyone.
Until next time, get pissed off. Fuck capitalism. Bye.
Yeah, good man.